Story begins with a young married couple, James and Sophie, carrying an old sofa into their modest New York apartment. They're close, humble, and happy doing things their own way. Sophie enjoys the simplicity, and James, despite being the son of a wealthy businessman, has chosen to step away from his father's fortune to live modestly. Then, everything changes when James gets a phone call. His father has passed away. Suddenly, James inherits everything: his father's estate, a massive tech company, and all the responsibilities that come with it. Overnight, their lives shift. They move out of their small apartment into a sprawling suburban mansion. It's cold, quiet, and way too big for Sophie's taste. The house comes fully staffed. There's a maid, a cook, and a housekeeper named Rosa. On their first morning in the mansion, James gets ready for work early. He tells Sophie about the new responsibilities at the company and his plans for the upcoming project. Sophie, still in bed, looks emotionally withdrawn. After he leaves, she heads downstairs and finds the staff already working. The maid offers her coffee, but she declines and walks away, uncomfortable with others doing things for her. She goes to her room and starts focusing on her art. A little while later, the maid checks in again to offer lunch. Sophie turns her away, asking to be left alone. She's clearly unsettled by the sudden shift in lifestyle. She's never lived in a place like this, and it shows. That night, James comes home exhausted from work. The house is quiet. He finds Sophie in their bedroom, sitting on the bed, waiting for him. She gently tells him that she let the staff go. She says she gave them 2 years' worth of severance pay and felt they hadn't been happy working there anyway. James is caught off guard. He argues that the house is too large to manage alone, but Sophie doesn't want a life built around people waiting on them. She prefers simplicity, even if it means more work. Even with everything weighing on them, Sophie helps him let it go for a while. They lie close, holding each other, letting the world fall away. As time passes, the pressure builds. James, already buried by the weight of running his father's company, now finds himself fixing broken tools and dealing with household tasks like mowing the lawn. He's frustrated, burned out, and barely keeping up. Sophie tries to manage things herself, but she struggles to adjust. The house is big, the silence is heavy, and neither of them feels settled. Looking for solutions, James talks to his assistant. He brings up a project his father had been approached about before, an advanced robotics program developing lifelike androids for home use. That same morning, they visit the lab. Sophie isn't comfortable with the idea, but she reluctantly agrees. There, a scientist named Julian introduces them to the androids. They're eerily human in appearance and manner. Most of them are designed as female domestic workers, which makes Sophie visibly uncomfortable. She hesitates, unsure of the idea altogether. After the initial demonstration, Sophie and James step outside to talk. She's uneasy, questioning the ethics of bringing something so human-like into their home. James tries to calm her down, telling her the robot is just a tool, no different than a washing machine or a vacuum. Still hesitant, Sophie finally agrees, but only if they choose a male model. Then, they choose Henry, a male android. He's calm, obedient, and looks like a real person. Julian demonstrates his programming. Henry follows commands without hesitation, even the ones meant to show he has no will of his own. He's simply a machine built to serve. Julian explains the basic instructions and reminds them that the android is capable of gradual adaptation. It learns over time. Sophie remains unsure, but with the housework piling up and James at his limit, they agree. They bring Henry home. He quickly settles into the household routine. Early in the morning, he starts preparing breakfast for James, moving smoothly through the kitchen. He politely asks Sophie if she'd like something as well, but she declines. Later, she spots him outside, trimming the lawn. From the window, she watches, expressionless, maybe even thoughtful. She doesn't say anything, but something about the scene holds her gaze. As James gets ready to leave for work, he urges Sophie to let Henry help out around the house, but she still isn't ready. He reminds her that Henry isn't a person, just a tool designed to make life easier. Sophie doesn't look convinced. She's not ready to treat him like a machine, even if she doesn't say it out loud. Later that morning, Sophie walks into her room after a shower and begins to dress, only then noticing Henry quietly cleaning in the corner, watching her. She freezes, startled, then firmly tells him to get out. As soon as Henry leaves the room, Sophie calls James at the office. She sounds uneasy as she tells him what just happened, but James brushes it off, saying Henry is just a machine like he always does. He tells her they'll talk later and promises to come home early. At the office, James is already under pressure. Roland, his assistant, brings bad news. The company is falling behind, and investors are losing confidence. That night, James asks Sophie to come play a game with him, but she's not in the mood. When she turns him down, James says he'll take Henry instead. Sophie reminds him that Henry's still charging, but James doesn't seem to care. He says it'll be fine. Soon after, James and Henry arrive at the racquetball court. They warm up, grab their rackets, and get ready to play. Before they begin, Henry asks what difficulty level he should match. James chooses amateur. The game begins, fast, aggressive, and competitive. As they play, James gets frustrated and shouts out loud. Henry stops and looks at him confused. He asks what James means when he shouts God. James, a little surprised, says it's just something people say. It doesn't really mean anything, but Henry keeps thinking about it. He says he doesn't believe in God, but he does believe in his creator. That belief, he explains, gives him certainty about tomorrow. The next morning, Sophie asks James how the game went. James says Henry played well, maybe too well. He admits Henry understood everything, maybe even too much. Then he heads off to work. During the day, Sophie and Henry work together on restoring the old couch. The conversation flows more easily now. When Henry asks why the couch matters, Sophie says it represents a dream, something she and James once shared. Henry listens carefully and asks if she ever dreams. She pauses, then asks if he does. He tells her he doesn't. He's not programmed for that. Sophie listens closely, a little more drawn in than before. Later that evening, James tells Sophie he's invited a few guests for the weekend, his father's old friends. Sophie isn't thrilled. She says the house still doesn't feel ready, and neither does she. But James doesn't seem to notice. He insists it'll be fine and heads out early the next morning, leaving her to handle everything. With James gone, Sophie and Henry spend the day doing chores together. She guides him through tasks. It feels oddly natural. At one point, she gives him a book, one she had once planned to share with James, but never did, lost in his work and distractions. Henry accepts it, and she seems lighter because of it. As Sophie gets ready to head into town, James asks her to pick up a part they need. She asks him again to repeat it. She nods, says nothing, and leaves quietly. While working, Henry picks up on the distance growing between them, noticing the small signs James seems to miss. James starts to realize that Henry is learning more than just mechanics. He's starting to read them both. Henry brings up a fear in his programming. He worries about being replaced, that when he becomes outdated, they'll throw him out. James is surprised to hear this, but doesn't say much. Later that evening, the guests arrive. Over dinner, Henry moves through the room with quiet ease, serving the meal. Sophie compliments his cooking, and things shift. He shares a line from the book she gave him. The table goes quiet, then everyone leans in. It starts to feel too personal. James steps in, sending Henry to wash the dishes. But the conversation stays on him. Sophie says more than she means to. That's when James cuts in, calling Henry an interesting, lifelike robot. Sophie's mood drops, and the evening ends in quiet tension between her and James. That night, Sophie wakes with a strange feeling. She slips out of bed and quietly grabs a metal bar. Something feels off. As she walks through the hallway, she notices the back door is slightly ajar. Cautiously, she steps forward and looks outside. In the moonlit yard, she sees Henry lying naked in the grass. She walks out to him, unsure what she's seeing. As she kneels beside him and gently calls his name, he opens his eyes and smiles faintly, saying he was dreaming, that he was human. She helps him up and they walk back toward the house. At the door, James appears. Sophie explains what happened. Henry was outside, and she found him like that. He's weak, barely able to stand. James steps in, helping him inside. The next morning, Julian visits the house to check on Henry. He says it was just a minor malfunction. Sophie mentions the dream, the certainty in Henry's eyes when he spoke of being human. Julian listens, then warns her Henry is programmed to please. If treated like a human, he may begin to behave like one, and much faster than expected. After Julian leaves, the tension erupts. James blames Sophie for crossing lines, for treating Henry like more than a machine. Sophie snaps back, saying she's only been trying to make things work, exactly as he'd asked. The argument hangs in the air. Sophie walks away, her bedroom door clicking shut behind her. Later, James confronts Henry in the bathroom. He repeats it. "You're just a machine." To prove it, James hands him a razor, asking him to shave his beard. Henry says nothing. Calm and steady, he begins to shave James, showing no emotion. James watches his reaction. Cold, detached, almost searching. To him, Henry is just a tool performing a task. Later that day, James sits with Roland at the office. The tension is high. Roland delivers more bad news, another project delay. The company is falling behind, and investors are starting to lose confidence. Back at home, James finds a letter from Sophie, brief but tender, mentioning the finished couch and the tidied bedroom. Hoping to reconnect, he lights a few candles, softening the space. But when Sophie comes in, she's distant. She says she's tired and turns away. James doesn't push, but the distance between them is growing, and it's starting to show. The next morning, James learns that a major client has walked away. The weight of it presses down on him. At home, Sophie and Henry sit quietly by the fireplace, talking about dreams. Henry listens closely as Sophie opens up, their exchange calm and personal. Later that night, Sophie finds herself on the massage table, his hands moving gently along her back, steady. The moment feels safe, almost intimate. Then she stirs awake to find James beside her. It was a dream, but the feeling from the dream doesn't fade. It lingers, deeper than she expected. Still lying in bed, James asks if she was dreaming. She says she can't remember, but as they talk, she casually brings up Henry. James goes quiet, then gets up and heads out to get ready for the office. Sophie stays in bed, still wrapped in the afterglow of her dream. She nudges the door open, an unspoken invitation, letting the hallway in. For a moment, she lingers in the stillness, until a soft creak from the door behind her pulls her back. She gets up and sees Henry leaving, watching her just as she'd expected. Their eyes meet. She asks what he's doing, and he replies, saying he's only doing what she wants. Later that morning, as James gets ready to leave for the office, he pauses by the window. Outside, Sophie is by the pool, laughing with Henry, closer, more relaxed than usual. James watches for a moment, silent, uneasy. Instead of heading to the office, James drives straight to Julian, looking for answers. He says Henry is crossing lines, getting into Sophie's head, maybe even their bed. Julian, unbothered, brushes it off, calling Henry just a mirror with muscles. He suggests replacing Henry with a different unit, but James refuses, knowing it would only make things worse for him. Frustrated but with no clear solution, James heads home. Back at home, James confronts Henry, tense and direct. He demands he stop flirting with Sophie, accusing him of crossing the line. Henry calmly explains he's only trying to please both of them. It's part of his programming. James insists that no one, including Sophie, wants him acting that way. He also tells him to stop reading with Sophie or talking about books. It's not his role. He ends the conversation by sending Henry back to his docking station. Instead of heading to his docking station, Henry waits in the kitchen. When Sophie enters, he calmly tells her everything. What James said, what he was told not to do. She listens, her face tightening with frustration. Without a word, Sophie heads upstairs. In the bedroom, Sophie tells James she's leaving for a few days. James accuses her of getting too close to Henry, crossing a line. Sophie fires back, saying it's James who pushed her away, always distant, always controlling. They argue, intense and fast. The fight leaves them raw. Sophie storms out and leaves the house. Later, James stands at the sink, tense. He calls for Henry to bring the shaving kit. When Henry arrives, he comes in quietly, unexpected. At first, it's just routine. But something shifts. The tension builds. James doesn't stop it. It's not about desire, it's about control. What follows crosses a line, but neither of them says a word. The next morning, Henry has already made breakfast. The house feels quieter. Sophie still hasn't returned. James starts to say something to Henry, then stops himself and leaves. At the office, James tries to refocus. The deal he thought was dead is suddenly back, and this time, on better terms. Back home, Sophie has returned. She's alone with Henry, and the air between them feels different. She asks him for a massage, just to relax. At first, it's just comfort, a way to unwind, but it goes further. Henry leans in and kisses her. Then quietly, he says, "I love you," just like James used to. Sophie pulls away, stunned. She tells him to go back to his docking station. She doesn't want to believe what just happened. A little later, James returns home. Sophie is still shaken. She tells him everything that happened. James is furious. He doesn't blame Henry, though, not completely. He says Henry only does what he's told, which means Sophie must have wanted it too. The fight explodes. James storms out to the charging station, punches him in the face, and rips the connection, shutting Henry down and contacting Julian, asking him to come by in the morning. The next morning, James leaves for work, expecting Julian to arrive soon. But before he does, Henry wakes up on his own and quietly walks into Sophie's room. He knows what's coming. He's calm, steady. He asks Sophie if they're really going to get rid of him just for a kiss. She doesn't know what to say, but admits things have gotten complicated. Then Henry tells her the truth. The night before, she stopped things from going too far, but James didn't. He let it continue. Henry says it went further, and James never said no. Sophie freezes, shocked and unsure who she can trust. In a few moments, Julian arrives. Sophie asks him to shut Henry down. Before leaving, she makes one last request, that Henry wait for her return. Then she heads to James. Julian agrees and walks upstairs, but Henry isn't ready to follow his commands anymore. He refuses to return to the station, saying he's been lying about everything to everyone. Meanwhile, Sophie meets James at the office. This time, there's no avoiding the truth. They both admit it. Things with Henry went too far. But it wasn't just about him. It was about the space that had grown between them, the things they stopped giving each other. Henry only filled the gap they created. They apologize, genuinely. For once, Sophie understands him, and James finally hears her. Then a message comes in, urgent, from Henry. James and Sophie rush home. They find Henry standing alone in the yard. Before stepping outside, Sophie quietly grabs a knife from the kitchen and keeps it at her side. Together, she and James approach slowly. She holds the knife close, unsure of what they'll face, but Henry doesn't react. Calmly, he begins to explain. Julian's project was never about building robots. These weren't machines. Henry wasn't created. He was taken, a real boy, abducted years ago and reprogrammed to believe he was something else. Then, the truth breaks wide open. Henry looks toward the sky again, broken. James acts fast. He contacts the authorities and heads straight to Julian's company. Investigators move fast, shutting the place down, seizing records and questioning everyone. What they uncover confirms the worst. Julian's operation wasn't building robots. He was using real people, taken, reprogrammed, and sold as machines. In a hurry, they return home with the police, ready to arrest Julian. But it's too late. When agents come to the property, Julian comes unexpectedly, shooting two of them. He tries to kill James and Sophie, but Henry intervenes. He attacks Julian, kills him, and then walks off into the woods. They wait, unsure of his reaction, then follow. But it's too late. They find Henry's body lying in the yard, a knife beside him. He took his own life. Years pass. Sophie and James sit in the park, watching their son play in the grass. They call his name, Henry. It's a new beginning, but some memories never leave.